Hey guys, it's time to color and we are going to be using watercolor paints. The first thing I want you to do is just double check that you've erased out all of your pencil. I'm going to grab my magic rub and just kind of give it once over and kind of take a look and make sure that all my pencil markings are gone as much as possible. Double check that I have traced over everything and I didn't miss anything as I go. All right. So today we are going to focus purely on our succulents, and then we'll work on our planter, and then we'll work on our background. So we're going to kind of do this in 3 different stages. If you work too fast, we're going to have some watercolor issues. So just a few reminders. Watercolors, gentle, gentle, gentle. Painting is meant to be a gentle, I almost said sport, a gentle activity, and paint in all kinds of paint, but watercolor especially. So I have a different kind of brush at home than you guys do, but same concepts apply. You want to make sure that you are using just the tip to kind of apply your paint when you are doing small details. If you're doing larger details, then you can use more of the side of the brush to apply the paint, but we never smash our brush on the paper. We never smash our brush into our paints. Okay? If you need to mix a color, you can either do that directly onto your paper, or you can use the clean part of your paint palette to mix a few colors in here. If your paint palette isn't clean, just run this part under the sink and then take a paper towel and just kind of rub it off. Try not to get this part under the sink water because it will start to just kind of run and get everywhere. All right? Okay, so I think we are about ready to go. So again, we are going to start on our succulents. This would be a great time for you to pull back up that folder of succulents to look at as a reference, or you can wing it and kind of make them up as you go. The one thing I want you to think about though is that while everything is sort of green, it's not going to be all the same green. So you want to make sure that you are creating different types of green based on the plant and the look that you want. Okay, so I'm going to first kind of moisten this green over here. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to add a darker color to that when we're kind of done. I'm going to do it directly on the paper. So I am going to carefully paint one of these leaf petals. And I'm going to bring this green down. And you do have to work carefully but quickly with watercolor. And you want it to blend nicely. This is nice paper. The watercolor paper you have at home with you is nice. I just made a slight boo-boo, but that's all right. It does happen. All right. So then after I get this green down, while it's still wet, I'm going to go in and grab a little bit of blue. And I'm going to kind of trickle that on the outside edge. And let it kind of do its own thing. It's going to kind of bleed in a little bit naturally because the color is still wet. So water moves, right? So as long as the water is wet, your paint is also going to move. Okay, and I'm going to kind of go over just the edges. Okay, I kind of like how that's looking, so I'm going to apply that to all 4 of my petals. Now the only tricky part is if I immediately jump over here and I do this part down here, it's going to bleed together. So you do definitely want to let things dry in between. So I'm actually going to wash my brush and jump over to this guy over here. And I'm going to use more of my lime green. Again, being gentle as you pick up the color. If your color is mushy at all, just grab a little bit more water and kind of scrape off your edge. If the color is mushy, most likely you're going to pull up too much paint on your brush. But the mushy color thing does happen. All right, so I'm going to paint this more lime green over here. And I'm using the shape of the cactus and the succulents to kind of guide how I paint each one. And if your color gets too dark or opaque, grab a little bit of water and just go straight to your paper and spread it out, and it'll thin that color out a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to finish adding this in. And then I'm going to decide, okay, what do I want to do to help kind of accent these shapes? I'm going to go back to my regular green. And I'm going to kind of trace over just those Sharpie lines and kind of let it bleed naturally. And let it bleed in. It's kind of the cool part about watercolor is you have total control, but sometimes it can get out of control. So if you want it to bleed, you got to work while it's wet. If you want something to not bleed, you have to work while it's dry. So you have to be kind of conscious of that in the decision making you make. But see, adding that green just added a little bit of dimension to that plant, but it's completely different than this one over here, and that's exactly what we want, okay? Now, some succulents have that, like, there's like pink values or purple values in them. Please feel free if that's how you want to address a certain plant, you can do that. I'm going to need to go back and do this flower eventually as well. So I need to be mindful of that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and work on this one with petals. My color is way too dark right now, so I'm going to grab a little water, soak that color up a little bit too. It is also good, I don't have one, I definitely should have grabbed one, is to have a paper towel next to you while you're working with watercolor, and that way if you need to dry off your brush, you can. So if I have any emergencies, I'm going to have to go run away from my desk and grab a paper towel. But watercolor is meant to be transparent. We should see through the paper a little bit, but it doesn't mean that you can't get strong color. So just kind of be mindful of that as you are working. So petal by petal, I'm not going to make you watch me do the whole thing, but you get the idea. So I'm using more of this turquoise color down here, and then I could kind of play with this a little bit and say, well, what if I add a little bit of yellow? What's going to happen? And just kind of drop that in again while it's still a little wet, and just let that dry that way. That way there's kind of multiple colors in all of my succulents and cactuses, and you can do a little less in some, a little more in the other, but again, it still looks completely different than the other ones that I have done. Okay, the last one I want to show you quick is this guy, and I think I'm going to make this one have some purple values in it. So I'm going to go over to my violet paint, and it's way too dark, so I'm going to kind of soak this up and spread it out. This little bit of paint that I plopped on there, I can probably get it on the entire plant bed. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to do it just a light layer of this violet, and then I'm going to let it dry. And then that way I can do a different technique as it dries, and I can go over that with another color. All right, so everything is wet, right? I mean, I could go back and finish these a little bit, but everything else is a little too wet to move on. So that's why it's important to recognize that I can't do this flower yet unless I want pink to go into the green cactus, and I don't. I can't do these yet if I want to make sure I keep them with the dark edge on the outside and the lighter on the inside. So this would be the point where you would take a break, okay, and come back to it at another time. Give it at least 10-15 minutes to sit as is. Be very careful about using a hair dryer, because if it's too puddly and you go to blast a hair dryer, you could push that paint off to the side. So I would prefer you just let it naturally dry on its own. Don't try to use any paper towels to soak up the color, because that's what will happen is you'll soak up your paint and not just the water. So we're gonna let it dry, and then we're gonna move on to our kind of next step tomorrow. All right, take a break, come back to it, or just wait till tomorrow and then you'll be ready to go for the next part.